Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic Re.Con Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. Don't forget to subscribe. I post a new video every Tuesday at 3 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. I want to, before I get into saying hi to this week's guest, I just wanted to mention I met Deacon Adam Curtis a few weeks ago at the Boise Men's Conference, Catholic Men's Conference, and I have here a short bio just so you have a little bit of background. Deacon Adam Curtis has served at Ascension Catholic Church in San Diego since his ordination in 2015. He was originally from Baltimore and is a Navy veteran, and he had 26 years as a Navy SEAL officer, including command of SEAL Team 3 during combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was just explaining to Deacon Adam that I was manning a booth at the men's conference, and I didn't have a chance to hear his entire testimony. So I got bits and pieces, and afterwards I had to tell him that was phenomenal what I did hear. And I'm fortunate enough to have this channel so I can invite people and get a chance to hear their whole story. So Deacon Adam, thank you so much again for agreeing to do this. And I look forward to hearing the whole story this time.
Great to be with you, Eddie. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So if you would, based on what you said at the men's conference, I don't remember where you started in the story, but I'd love to hear, and I know the listeners would love to hear how this journey began for you and how long it took, this entire process.
Yeah, you bet. So kind of as background, you mentioned, first of all, before I start, you're in Boise, I'm in San Diego. I was tempted to do this out on my porch in my short sleeves just because I could. It's about 80 here today, and so my heart goes out to you. When I was there a couple of weeks ago, it was 14, and I was happy to it was my San Diego appreciation weekend. So so it's great to be with you. So a little bit of background. So I'm, as you said when you introduced me, I'm from Baltimore. I grew up in the suburbs, just a straight middle class family, intact family, solid, but not religious at all. So my faith journey didn't really start till high school. And at that point, I got, invited to a Protestant youth group, Young Life, if you've heard of those guys. And I had no interest in anything religious, but there were girls I was interested that were, going to this. They were purportedly supposed to be at this meeting. I was like, oh, I'll go. And I had a good time. We sang some goofy songs and laughed a lot. And I went back the next week and kept going. And while I was there, in a very non-pressure way, very easygoing way, kind of the capstone of each of these evenings of a lot of fun was the adult leader talking about Jesus Christ, and he laid it out. He laid out the good news in a way that was compelling, and I was like, okay, I'm at least interested. And then I wound up on a retreat with the same group, kind of against my better judgment. I was like, I don't do any of this stuff. And, but they invited me and were a little insistent. And I said, okay, I'll go to the beach for a weekend in March. And while I was there, I had the kind of the fairly standard Protestant altar call. Didn't know it at the time, but, and I responded, and we were invited to, it wasn't a come forward altar call. It was more of a, go take a walk. We're going to dismiss y'all, and you go wrestle with the question of, do you believe this idea that Jesus Christ is actually the Son of God and he came so that we can have our sins forgiven? And if you do, then accept him as your Lord and Savior. And we prayed the sinner's prayer. I need you, Lord. I invite you into my life, and that was the end of the story. I was in the Protestant vernacular in the 80s, I was born again, right? And everything was good after that. And as you know, that it isn't quite how it happens, but that was the start of it. And what I would say, as with many of my conversion experiences, that one was partial. It was real. It was, sincere. But, I didn't put God on the throne and have my life revolve around him. I I believed, though. I believed this guy Jesus was divine, and so that was the beginning. And I'll kind of walk through the eventual journey to the church, but that kind of gets us started.
Uh, at what age did that happen?
So I was 16, and
So no faith background up to that point, really, aside from what you just said about young life and having exposure there. But in childhood, there was really nothing,
well,
no consistency, in other words.
no consistency. The What I will say is I'm actually more of a revert than a convert, right? So I was actually baptized Catholic. My mom's Catholic. It's been faithful her whole life. Married to my dad, who on whatever day you get him is either atheist or agnostic, somewhere in that realm, and baptized through First Communion. I barely remember that. I was telling somebody not very long ago, I did First Communion. I never had to do a confession because my first confession was when I got confirmed in 2000. So
No
many
kidding.
years
Okay.
later. Yeah.
Okay.
So there were some gaps in my catechetical formation, to say the least.
Sure. Yeah.
So anyway, and I went to church, because mom made us, until I was cognizant enough to realize, hey, dad's not going, and I'm
Yep.
going with dad. And that happened at a very young age. And I wasn't anti, I was just, completely ambivalent, and would wind up going, at Christmas or now and then, but we weren't, mom's faith, and like I said, she is faithful, just not her pretty private. And I think that comes from, just the her upbringing and
Yeah.
whatnot. So it just wasn't part and parcel to who we were as a family, particularly with my dad's kind of where he laid in the whole thing. So that was, teenagehood, and I graduated high school a couple years later, and then went off to the Naval Academy. And I described that period as kind of one foot in each camp. I had my Bible study buddies, my young life buddies, but my weekend buddies were a different group, and they were not Bible study folks, to say the least. And that when I went to the Naval Academy, I kind of kept up the same thing. I found a great, mostly Protestant organization, and had great Christian friends. But on the weekends, I'd kind of hang with my less Christian friends, and never even, I think back on it, never really felt a pang about it until my junior year. My Christian group, we invited, we had guest speakers regularly. One of them was a retired Marine, Tom Hemingway was his name, amazing guy, and he came and talked to us. And he had retired from the Marine Corps, Vietnam vet, tough as nails, retired from the Marine Corps, and he ran a retreat center in Colorado. And he invited any of the midshipmen that wanted to go to come camping for 2 weeks in the summer. And he showed us some pictures, and he described, we're going to do rappelling and rock climbing, and do 14ers, and this is going to be so I sign me up. And again, kind of that, I get brought into this, opportunity for God's movement, not really because I thought it was like, hey, I need to make this next, Christian step, but boy, did God use it. And while we were on this camping trip that he led himself, and right in the collegiate peaks in near Buena Vista, Colorado, just gorgeous place. And what Tom kind of used that opportunity to talk about Christian leadership to all of us, budding military leaders. We weren't all from Navy. It was a Navy, Army, Air Force, et cetera. And what I got out of that was his example of living an integrated life. He didn't have the dichotomy of the weekday version of his self versus the weekend version. He's like, hey, if you're in, you got to be all in, and if you're not in on the weekends, you're not all in, and therefore, you really have you got to examine that. And by the end of that camping trip, what I realized that there was one thing holding me back from being all in, and because every weekend I would drink, and I like to drink a little bit, which led to drinking a lot. And I wasn't a full-fledged alcoholic, but I was an alcohol abuser just about every weekend. And I really never saw a problem with it until I realized that was my big obstacle. So by the end of that camping trip, I decided I'm actually going to stop drinking, and I stopped for 20 years. And then, and so I kind of reinvented myself when I got back to my next event, which was on a cruise in overseas. And I just started it with, nope, I'm not drinking. And it was hard at first, but what God showed me was that by taking that being fully integrated seriously, that was the opportunity for him to grow me spiritually in a big way. Because in the next year, how much growth happened versus the previous 5 years of Christian journeying, it was pretty amazing. So that was my big lesson learned. Then I graduated from the Naval Academy, went off to SEAL training here in San Diego, and was by God's grace got through all that, and got assigned to my first SEAL team and living the life. I mean, I'm still trying to be a serious Protestant Christian, and had some buddies that were linked up with at the time, kind of just all keeping us going the right direction, and really just getting after being a young SEAL leader. And it was just a terrific time frame in my life. And during that time, I met a wonderful gal, and we shared our kind of being passionate about our faith. And of course, there was one drawback: she was Catholic, and that was the challenge I had to get through. And I quizzed her pretty incessantly on her love for our Lord, and why she worships Mary, because I had heard all those things, and but she passed. She's like, yep, I really do love Jesus. So I was like, okay, maybe you can be Catholic and Christian. I've met one, so we're good. And so we dated, and wonderful experience of courting, and then got married, in the Catholic Church. No mass. I considered myself Protestant despite my baptism. And then we lived, for the first 15 years of our marriage, kind of with one foot in each camp. My intent. She's a child of the 70s, so her catechetical formation had gaps in it as well, and I could kind of find those. And we were mostly in a Protestant environment. We'd go to mass on the weekends, but it was just a matter of time in my mind before my persuasive arguments for leaving the Catholic Church fully were going to take hold. And so I was comfortable with that, and would just kind of live along those lines.
So you said, okay, you were going to mass, but also going to a Protestant service, or you were saying it was practically that that parish was very Protestant in their approach, or what?
No, we would go to mass. We didn't do a whole lot of it, was get real involved with our on the Catholic Church side.
Got it.
And we generally wouldn't go to a Protestant service. So on Sunday we'd go to mass, right?
Got it.
That in my mind, that was the mission field. I was there to
evangelize,
convert all you heathens.
Yeah.
And then but every forever before we got married, and the first 20 years of our marriage, we did a weekly Bible study that we either hosted or went to, usually in this organization that Military Officers Christian Fellowship is what it's called. A great organization, non-denominational, but almost all Protestant. And that's what their model was, kind of the weekly Bible study. And that's where our growth was, both of us. We both grew so much in that, just getting the word. We're Pope Francis calls it the letting loose the unruly word of God, right? And despite having some theological problems that I can see as a Catholic now, what it was really fruitful time in God's word for a long time. And we were growing there and not understanding anything about the church. That was just time to make my wife's Catholic guilt feel better. That was why we were there. And she told me that. She told me not just the guilt part, but she said, because early I would kind of pull her away, and we'd miss mass, but she came to me and said, I feel like I'm a better Christian when I go to mass. It impacts me. And the last thing I wanted to do was, be a stumbling block for my wife. I mean, I knew better as a Protestant. So, okay, we'll get to mass, and I committed to it, and we went faithfully. But to me, it was just a matter of time before we were growing in one area, and this other thing that, whatever it was,
Yeah.
it was just going to erode over time. So.
So how long did that continue? That's one question. I also wanted to ask you, your fellow SEALs, was religion pretty common among the brothers? Was that a big
No,
draw? I mean, because I know ethics, values, morals, in general, seem to be very, very, very high on the board from what I know. So
well, it's a great question, and the answer is it depends, right? I'll talk about now. I still work for the SEAL teams. It's still my kind of my work family, and there's a lot of believers in the SEAL teams. Is it Does it have a religious flavor anywhere? My
oh,
experience is no.
yeah,
I mean that's so. The private. Well, first of all, there's a fairly significant Protestant evangelical. You can find those guys, as I was. And then there's kind of a lot of, I believe something. I believe in God. There are atheists, but it's not like it's an atheistic place. But it's far from a group of choir boys. I mean, that's not how you define it. So, my experience, particularly at that point, I look back and I'm very thankful for, particularly my, Tom Hemingway experience I had told you about, and that kind of coming to a conclusion that drinking was a problem for me, because that really helped me, particularly as an officer. I'm supposed to be a leader. I'm as a young officer, what I can see now after decades is, the pitfall of it's easy to kind of become one of the boys, early. And then you got to kind of have to scratch back your officer leader credibility, because if you've been, hanging a little bit too much, the after midnight stuff, on the weekends, it's a little harder to, your credibility, a little harder to get back.
sure.
And that's just my experience. The guys would, if you ask any Christian SEAL, they'll give you a different version of that. But I'm very thankful that by making the decision not to drink well before that period, so that just wasn't even on the table at that point, which meant I just got bored after a certain point in any evening where I'm out, and it just worked. It wasn't that hard to just kind of maintain some of that leadership credibility. But again, everybody's got a different experience.
And so, what was my first question? The period of time. So you are convinced that it's just a matter of time before you essentially end up fully Protestant, in the sense that there's no more mass.
Right.
How did that all develop? And I'd love to
You can
know
see.
where your wife was during that process, if she knew that you had kind of this secret ambition to
And it wasn't secret.
open
I
ambition.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and it was just kind of wasn't something we talked about a lot, but she knew that I didn't get anything out of mass. That wasn't my thing, and we both knew we were growing greatly as Christians in this Bible study, Protestant Bible study environment. So it was pretty overt. That went on for a good decade, and as you can see, how well my plan worked, right? That's what I told the Catholic Men's Conference. I'm talking to a Catholic Men's Conference as a Catholic minister. My wife wins in the end all the time, no matter what. So it's don't cross her. Um, so that did go on for a decade or so, and so what changed was we went on a retreat back to that same place in Colorado, same organization, same guy was there, still running it. It was just our favorite. We went every year. We'd load the kids up, drive from San Diego, and I was actually on the board at one point of this organization. So So we're at this retreat, and the Protestant minister who was leading, it was the retreat leader that period. I think it was a week in the summer. Really impressive guy. He was a retired Navy chaplain, Orthodox Presbyterian. I don't know if you run into those guys.
Yeah.
There's some smart Bible guys. They know so he knew his Bible better than probably anybody I'd ever met. I was wowed by this guy, right? Anyway, we struck up a relationship, and we put the kids down one night and had him over to our cabin, and we're comparing notes and having a nice time together. And he asked us about our church. It's kind of standard, Protestant discussion is, because you're always church shopping. It's like, where are you going? So I kind of proudly describe our 1 foot in each camp methodology here, because that's my mission field, and I really did sincerely see it that way. I'm kind of there. I'm trying to be more involved by this point in the church. We would teach some of the Sunday school stuff. I've got Catholic friends who I taught their kids, and they look at me now. You taught my kids when you were a Protestant, didn't you? It's like, yes, I did. So he comes over. I described this kind of proudly, and we proceed to have a very in-depth discussion for a couple hours, and he basically walks through why he thinks we're playing with fire. This is dangerous to our souls, right? I mean, this Catholic stuff is bad, and he's got all of the Whore of Babylon, transubstantiation, a word I had never heard in my life, and he's talking about it like, look it up, you'll see, and and his, I don't doubt it, his sincerity, but and then he gave us a list of titles. We didn't have Google or Amazon at the time, so I had to go order them, but list of books that like, you should read this and you should read this, and I immediately went out and got the books when we got home, and I tore through them, and Bonnie was reading most of them alongside me, and in my mind, my timeline just got sped up by at least 5 years, maybe 10. I was like, hey, we're gonna be out of the church by within a year. We just got to read a little bit more and pray about it, and we were right on the cusp, I would say. And then my bride, Bonnie, who's smarter than I am by a long shot, she had the wisdom to say, maybe we should see what the church has to say about herself before we leave completely. And I was a little surprised, because I thought we were in my mind, we were 90% out. We just had a toe left in the water. And she says, so I was a little surprised, but I'm like, okay, then, what could the church have to say about herself, right? So we went, it's like, I know how to do that on the Protestant side at this point. I'm become serious about studying my Bible and reading Christian writers, and I go to Christian bookstores, and I know what they look like. I know how to find what I want. They're big, brightly lit, lots of rows of books, and
Yep.
And that's like, I don't know where the Catholic version of that is. So we had to look it up, right? And sure enough, we found a Catholic store, and we went in. The place has been around. They've since moved, but here in San Diego, and O'Connor's, and but their old location was, kind of a little bit of a, not one of the up and coming parts of town, storefront. And they had clearly been there decades. They had stuff everywhere. They had statues and rosaries and medals and I mean, scary for a Protestant, I mean, like, oh my gosh, what did I just walk into? I had never been into anything like that, and vestments in the back, and and then it's like, and I think I had called ahead or looked it up in the yellow pages or something, and sure enough, they said books. So I asked the lady, is there a bookstore or a book part? And she points to the back corner, and this tiny little corner, that looks like nobody's been to for a decade, right? And sure enough, that's where the books are. And so we go back there, and we're poking around, and we walk out with a couple of books. I don't remember one of them, but the one that I do remember well was Carl Keating's Catholicism versus Fundamentalism, right? And that was pretty new at the time, because this is in the 90s, so I don't think it had been out that long. But
Let me ask you this real quick. The books that were anti-Catholic that you had read, were those modern, or were those closer to, was it 1800s?
No, one of them I remember reading. I'd know the name if I heard it. Kind of the classic history text that's probably early 1900s.
Okay.
But then there was there were three or four, and most of them were relatively recent. They weren't near a century old kind of thing. Anyway, so so we walk out with a couple books, and we both start reading. We each start reading one, and but then I put one down. And my wife's reading the Keating book, and she's kind of, it's like, this is interesting. And so I kind of started reading, interspersed reading with her, and I get through about a chapter, and I am offended, right? I am like, this is divisive, offensive, condescending. I've never recommended that book to give to a Protestant since, and it might be fine, but it all depends where you sit at the time. But anyway, so I just put it down, and Bonnie just kept reading a little bit, and she'd look up, and I remember once she looked up and said, "Are we fundamentalists?" And I proudly, puffed my chest out. Of course we are. And she says, "Hmm." So anyway, by chapter 4 or so, she keeps coming at me with questions, and they're open-minded, questions, and being the sensitive seal husband that I was at the time, I just got very upset eventually, and I actually did. The only time I've ever asked her, more like told her, I don't think you should be reading that stuff. It's divisive for our marriage. And we got to that point, right? This was weeks, through it, and I was getting ready. So that kind of went down to a dull roar. She wasn't. We had a lot. We had 3 kids under, 3 and under. We had the 4th one on the way. I'm getting ready for a deployment. She didn't have enough energy to fight me, so she just kind of put it aside. But it kind of led to this friction in our marriage, and we're not used to that. The story I told at the men's conference was one of the 2 points that we've had some friction in our marriage, and that was after a traumatic event that the 2 of us had endured. And this is the other one, and it wasn't like we were, gonna get divorced or anything, but we've just been blessed with, joy in our marriage. We've been married, 34 years next month, and and still to this day, it's just it's a joy to be married to my lovely bride. So, but this was a lot of that joy. It wasn't like it all left, but it wasn't near as joyful, which that's a deficit when you're used to joy, right? So, so we're kind of just bumbling through this, and I'm getting ready to deploy. She's just working hard, taking care of the kids, and running the family. And so we kind of let it drop a little bit. And now I'm getting ready. This deployment's getting close, and I'm packing, and I'm getting ready to go. This particular deployment, it's the only one I did in my career on a Navy ship. Even though I'm a Navy guy, most of my deployments were, to a combat zone or just to a forward base, not ship time. But I'm going on a ship, so I know I'm going to have a lot of time, right? That's what you have on a ship is, you still got lots of work to do, but you get 24 hours in a day. So, and I love to read. So I brought a stack of books, right? Probably, 20. And I grabbed 2 or 3 of these books that, the 2 that we'd gotten from the Catholic bookstore, and another one that somebody had given her. It was Surprised by Truth by Patrick Madrid. And I just stuck them in the pile, and I didn't tell her. And I stuck them at the bottom of the pile because I had no interest in this, but it was just my conscience saying, probably talking to me about, I'm not being real open-minded here. So I need to, I should at least in the calm of day, without any friction, go read these things. And so I did that. I went on deployment, worked my way through the stack, and eventually got down to these books. And I got there a little faster than I planned, combined with God just put Catholics in my way on this deployment. So my deal was a weekly Bible study. Well, there was one on the ship. There's a big helicopter carrier. There's a few thousand people. So there was a wardroom, an officer Bible study, very, just like every other one I had ever done, and non-denominational, but mostly Protestant. But there was a Catholic who went, and he actually knew his stuff, and he was a terrific guy. I both worked with him and did this Bible study, and he made me scratch my head and read my books a little bit more. And then I was still going to mass on ship. We had a Catholic chaplain, because I had promised my wife, that's what we're going to do. So I'm not going to stop just because I'm the Protestant one. So I'd go to mass, and while I was at mass, young Marine, a bunch of Marines on board, young Marine lieutenant, after mass one day says, "You want to, get together and compare notes on spiritual stuff?" And I don't remember what he said, but it was really an odd thing. I didn't know him at all, but a real Catholic guy, and he quickly realized I wasn't, and all of a sudden I'm his mission field. And so so I'm getting bombarded by books and people, and all over the place during this deployment. And I'm not telling, this was we didn't have good connectivity, so email was still just a pretty new thing, especially email underway. So about every week I could get a message to my back and forth to Bonnie. So I'm not telling her any of this, because I'm not ready to share it yet. I'm not trying to be this. I'm not trying to hide anything, but I'm just not comfortable. Like, I know where this is going. So anyway, that went on, and by the end of that deployment, I kind of read and talked my way into an openness to, I say I did, God had used all of these people and his providential circumstances I hadn't, I couldn't say I'm going to be Catholic, but I was now in the, wow, there's something there that I can't quite get around yet, so I came home. It was kind of high drama. I actually had to come home early because my older son got really ill. We almost lost him. Thankfully, he was eventually okay. My wife's 7 months pregnant while my son's in the ICU. My wife's out to here pregnant, just 7 months pregnant. So, he couldn't get, she calls all that period the dark night of the soul for her, and she can see it now, that this vicarious suffering idea, she couldn't answer the why, but she connects them powerfully, and her suffering is somehow connected to my conversion, because I came home and here's how she found out, right? So deployment's almost over, but I fly home, and we're talking about, every time you have a kid in a Navy hospital, just like most civilian hospitals probably, it's like, okay, what's your contraception plan afterwards? And ours was, even though we were, I had this Protestant thing going, but we had actually, kind of forswore all the artificial stuff, and we were NFP followers. It's kind of unusual Protestant version, but we had this discussion before, and Bonnie says, they're asking me now, and my OB is telling me, she's not sure that I should ever have any more children because of how hard this one was. So maybe they should, tie my tubes while at childbirth, because that's the opportunity. And which, in my Protestant world, no harm, no foul, right? No, that's all okay.
Yep.
And her understanding and prioritization of that just wasn't on her radar as anything grave by any means. So she shares this with me, and my response, because she hasn't heard any of what's going on deployment, because we're just focused on our son, who's is well, maybe we should see what the Pope thinks. And she's like, "What did you do with my husband?" She has, and so I have to, in this high drama time, I have to kind of like bring her up to speed on this journey I've been on for 5 months. And it's making her head spin. She doesn't have enough, she doesn't have the energy or time to really focus on it. But but she says, okay, let's, and we did some searching, and it turns out that the Pope and the Church care deeply about these things. And so it led to, that was the beginning of us, kind of coming back on the same sheet. And then from there on, we were journeying together and exploring it together. And it still took, that was 97, I think, 96 or 97. And it wasn't until 2000 that I actually was confirmed. But by 98, I'd say I was fully convinced, and we were, started practicing again. I just hadn't received, I was actually Catholic, it turns out, and so I just hadn't received my, I hadn't been confirmed, but I was confirmed in 2000. So that's kind of the journey. I will share one other thing with you. So as I got back, so I had also been detached from all my Protestant brothers and sisters, but particularly my fellow men, who were close to me. And I had several, but a couple real close Protestant brothers. And I don't want to be a Catholic. I think I know what that's like, even though now intellectually it's like, I can see I don't have an answer to these things that I thought were pretty simple. I don't have an answer, but if the answer is what the church says it is, then I think I don't have a choice. I got to be Catholic, right? I got to be with the truth. So I'm pulling every string I can to figure to somebody show me how, what's wrong with the logic? What's wrong with this idea that this is the church that Jesus established, and it's consistent with all the church fathers and all of the history of the early church, and the novelty started much later. And so I'm wrestling with this, and I'm calling as soon as I got home from this deployment, I'm calling my brothers, and like, hey, I'm struggling here. I'm struggling with these issues. Help me. And they're still good friends, but they didn't have any help for me, and it wasn't like I had all this like, here's the alternative answers. They just weren't there. And nowadays, I think all this stuff is easier to sort through when you have, the internet available, and, kind of thing. So there are counter arguments. I don't think they're, good or valid, obviously, but boy, I was searching for them, and I couldn't, I couldn't find them. So eventually, I just prayed my, almost the same prayer as I prayed on the beach a bunch of years earlier of, God, I don't know, but I'm going to follow you where you lead me. And he's been, it's been a great adventure ever since. And that absolute worst case scenario for me was, I just felt like the church was so dead as compared to my Protestant reality. I just didn't know that I just couldn't see the joy and the beauty and the intellectual tradition and all of these things that, the treasures of the church are so great, so deep, so amazing. And I continue to unpack them every day and feel like an absolute novice, and know I can spend the rest of my life just unpacking those treasures. And I couldn't see any of that. All I knew was, okay, God's calling me. It's just going to be the second half of my life is going to be pretty miserable, but I'm going to be faithful.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I'm curious, how did you get the call? So 2015, you were ordained. So when did you get the call to the diaconate, and how did that all play out? Because that's obviously a decade plus later. Yeah, that just amazes me. So how did that all come together?
That's just God's sense of humor, it's I by the time I was confirmed in 2000 at the Easter Vigil, by then I could see some of the beauty, and almost immediately so much more of it. And it's, so the early 2000s, even though life got really crazy, especially after 9/11, I knew I was in the right place, all good. But, then my work life was, just eating my lunch for the next few years. And so just trying to, do our best at being faithful, learn throughout that time. Probably by the time things started to settle down for me professionally, just, not quite as crazy, even though the community, our SEAL community was still, at the height of it. By '07, '08 for me, just my assignments, I was in different places, just different assignments that they weren't crushing me. We got a little bit more involved in our church. We moved to the house we live at now in Tierra Santa, the Ascension. So we started to worship there. My wife and our 5 kids would go to daily mass. She homeschooled them up till high school. So we were visible there, but that, our family was involved. Me personally, I went to mass. I wasn't very involved. I was now deeply committed, but pretty busy. And I don't know what year it was. It was probably '07, '08, '09, somewhere in that range. Our pastor actually cornered me one day and asked me to consider being a deacon. And our kids were still young. My Navy career still had some runway on it. So Bonnie and I talked about it, had a little bit of a chuckle, like, when are we going to fit that in, and I told him no, but it was just bad timing. And it was, but in my mind, okay, moving on. And then we've had, right in that period, we had several pastor rotations, but then our 2 pastors later, I think, came in, got the church, had the church going in a good direction. And much to my surprise, he asked me probably 2010. So it's probably 2007, 2006, first pastor. 2010 or so, got asked again by the next pastor. And I was like, was there a pass down or something? Did you guys compare notes? So I went to my wife and I was like, started to chuckle again. You know what, that new pastor, asked me, and she didn't chuckle like I did. She's like, I can see that. And, our kids were older at this point. They were still in the house, but we had a couple in college, and so kind of gave me pause, gave us pause, and I, gave it some real thought, gave it some real prayer, I thought, and on one of my deployments, I got pretty sick and I had to be medevaced from, we were in northern Kuwait. We were actually about to invade Iraq, and I got my blood count started going the wrong direction. They had to fly me to Germany and, do all kinds of tests and stuff. And why was I telling this story? It made sense to me in a minute. In any event, so when I went, they didn't quite figure it out, but a result of that was I have a bit of a tremor, right? I've got a handshake, and it's both hands, but it's particularly my right hand, and it's not debilitating by any means. It's not Parkinson's. They did every test they could, right? But but in any event, I prayerfully consider this, and I'm still wearing a uniform at this point, and this hand tremor makes me feel old and feeble, and I realized I had it one day during the national anthem while I'm on stage as a guest speaker, and I can't hold my salute without my hand flopping all over the place, because it turns out it gets worse if I'm a little nervous. So that's a little bit of adrenaline from being on stage. And anyway, it's still one of my least favorite things. I realize it's part of God's little tiny thorn in my side. Nothing like St. Paul, but if he could make it go away, I would be very happy. In any event, I go back to my pastor because I've given this some real thought. It's like, Father, I appreciate you, thinking of me, but I've got this hand tremor, and nobody wants a shaky deacon holding the chalice, and Father Anthony's his name, and Father Anthony didn't miss a beat. He said, "Do you remember Moses?" And Moses had a speech impediment, right? And as soon as he said it, I actually knew exactly. He didn't have to explain it to me. I knew the story, and I knew it was the answer that I really didn't want to hear it, but it was like, I can't get around that either. So I kind of tucked my tail between my legs and went and prayed some more, and realized that I wasn't really being open to, hey, if God's calling me. And then Bonnie and I prayed a lot, and we brought our kids into it, and made sure that they could see it as well. And I'll tell you, just his overabundant, exuberant blessings. My ordination and my marriage and my ordination in that order are, probably, my conversion, my marriage, and my ordination all in just the three of the biggest blessings of my life. The kids fall under the marriage one, so got to cover them.
That's beautiful. I'm curious, and you did allude to it. So all the hell that was going on in the world post 9/11, you were attending daily mass. Do you look back and thank God for that anchor during that period of time? I'm sure it was just upside down. And like you said, you were so busy that was the one thing that you could do. I'm sure it's
Yeah.
hard in that moment to be thankful, but now 15, 20 years later, do you ever think
Yeah.
about that?
Well, that was my wife and kids going to daily mass. That didn't fit into my
Oh, I
work
thought you said that
schedule.
you were able to make it to daily mass. Okay, got it.
Yeah, no, they did that. I would usually make it to a morning communion service early morning on my way to work. And yes, I look back at that now, and my anchor of got to have that plumb line, and my weekly mass and daily communion service, and just that what God did, kind of opening my heart to the church. Besides the blessings that, the treasures of the church, he also it was an act of such a spiritual growth, because I realized that I could be wrong on really important things. This was the most important thing in my life, was my faith, and I had the Jesus part right mostly, and almost everything else wrong. And so now this is, like, hey, I'm so much more real. I realize so much more that I do need a savior, and the just assurance, and the what an amazing thing that God left, not an ethereal spiritual church, but a real church that actually teaches. And so I could put my backpack, my theological backpack down. So I stopped worrying about any of that, and I'm still interested in that, because I love the life of the mind, and I think it matters what we think. But I don't have to get it right, because, like, what's the church say?
Yeah.
Well, my job is to be faithful, and in the midst of all of that chaos, that was all still brand new to me, and it was such a gift. My job is to be faithful, and the church will tell me if will figure out how to let me know if I'm getting it wrong. So
Yeah. What you just said reminds me of this gentleman I interviewed. He was a Southern Baptist, and he ended up coming to this uh, really, really obvious intersection. And he asked himself, could I be wrong about the Catholic Church? And he was talking about kind of his ego up to that point. To even ask that question was this huge, like a quantum leap, to be able to say, could I personally be wrong? Have I researched what the church teaches? No. Have I researched what people say in protest of the church? Yes. So those questions are difficult for everyone. So I totally get what you're saying and the whole journey.
yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to say to listeners that you think would be important, related to the story, related to your personal journey? Anything?
Nothing I can think of, Eddie. I just really appreciate what you're doing, and my prayer is that that my story, or any of the stories that you get to hear the account of through your ministry there, that they're powerful to somebody. That's what I think it's such a neat thing what you're doing, because I know that's how most of us get reached. Is I can point to the people in my life that have impacted me, and their personal stories. The doctrine matters, but what you're doing is really cool. So I pray that God, there's somebody out there that it's important that they hear mine, and if so, and praise God.
Oh, I appreciate that. It's funny when you're talking about resisting kind of that call to ordination. with this channel. So if you go back a year and 3 months, I felt a very strong call to do exactly what I'm doing. And I said, no, that I heard wrong, or I don't even know what it was. So I describe it often, if as you're running from God's will. You know it's true. You shut down. And so I did that for several months. And what was funny is that when I first heard that, or I got that conviction, I felt I was supposed to start in early January of 2021. And here I am, it's December 20th of 2020. And I said, there's no way I can do it now, because the date that I was supposed to start, it's too close. And in that moment, I felt it even stronger than ever. You're going to call this friend, this guy, and you're going to start the channel. And it was just one of those things where if you would just say yes in the moment, it pro- it would probably work according to his plan. I mean, he can obviously work all things for the good of those that love him, and we all have stories related to that. But boy, we are all stubborn at times, aren't we? So,
Amen.
yeah, amen. Well, thank you, Deacon Adam. Thank you for that story. It was a pleasure, like I said, getting to hear bits and pieces of the story before, and I really appreciate the fact that you can go back and recall so much of it, and the fact, God bless your wife. It was Bonnie, right? I'm not getting that wrong. Yeah. So, yeah, we'll be praying for your family, and the role that you continue to serve with the Navy, and everything that you do in your parish. So, thank you, everyone. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, comment, and until next time, take care and God bless. Bye.